Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm thankful and grateful to have you here listening to this podcast today. We can appropriately call this one, like title this podcast today, part two of our endeavor that began at the last one, number 10, that was talking about personalities that breed illness. I'm your host, Dr. Gabe Roberts. This is the subconscious healer, getting to the root of trauma. Now, if you recall from the last podcast, and if this is something that's not familiar to us, I encourage you to go back and listen to it because where we left off was of this tale of Mahala Nasaradan, a priest living in a local village who was referred to as crazy and often foolish because of his rather odd behaviors. And the story goes as he's searching under a streetlight at night, looking for something, scanning the ground, and soon he's accompanied by other people, including a police officer and some locals. And they finally said, what are you looking for? And he said, my key to my house. And they said after much time goes by and after they've all and contributed to scanning the ground looking for this key in the street light at night, they finally say, well, where did you lose it? He goes, in my house. And the participants and the locals and the police officer are stunned because they're looking under this light instead of the house. And they said, well, what are you looking out here for? And he says, well, because I can see better under the light. Now, that's where we left off last time. So let's continue with this and going into more details on how certain personality traits that are learned and solidified during the first few years of our life will transition into personalities that breed disease. And if you look at the way things are, as professionals and doctors of all sorts, whatever kind they are, they're trained in healing arts, but there's a tendency to evaluate our patients based upon our physical examination, our blood work, the history, and other factors as well, putting emphasis on maybe the microbial world, whether it's a virus that made you sick or maybe parasitic microbes or even something like a bacteria, maybe even Lyme, maybe H. pylori. Well, this analogy of looking at these things that we can evaluate on physical examinations, blood work, histories, looking at the microbial world is much just like the metaphor of Nasruddin observing, looking for his house key under a streetlight outside. So a search consisting within the range of the streetlight will not deliver the key to healing, as this can only be done from the blind spots, which are marked by darker, more mysterious, and I'm going to say this 99.9%, most of the time, they're from unknown areas to the person and unknown areas to the doctor. Just to give you a glimpse of that, I had a patient this last week who has had chronic shoulder pain, and everything, the whole gambit of everything has been done. And you're talking from stem cells to every kind of chiropractic work and acupuncture. And whenever we go looking for the root cause of this together, not only are there athletic events that have occurred through his life where he's been told to kind of ignore the pain and have this tenacious competitiveness to keep going and keep moving forward. But ultimately, one of our perceptions that we uncovered was when he was little tiny child, 3 years old, and upsetting his parents, and his father yanked his arm, and that was where the first initial holographic wound came from. Not necessarily a physical trauma like a shoulder dislocating or even a supraspinatus or an infraspinatus muscle getting tore or strained or sprained, but this was something that was considered stored memory in that area. So again, it's the blind spot. um, so let us go back briefly to the statement of personalities that breed disease, which may sound strange to some people. And even as you listen to this, you maybe have heard the common phrase, the good die young. And this originated from a Greek historian, Herodotus, around 445 BC, and was, of course, later made into the popular song from Billy Joel, released in 1978. The phrase implies that the morally uptight, kind, and compassionate people tend to die at a younger age than most people do. Now, it's true enough to be true, but it's not true enough to be helpful or true enough to explain why. So consider the psychologist, Dr. Linda Timoshok. Okay. Timoshok. It's Temoshok. So Dr. Lydia Timoshok, who in 1987 is the one that pointed out the specific characters of what she coined type C personality exists. Now, this is a significant contrast to the commonly known type personality of type A. And type C was strongly correlated with the growth and development of cancer. So, type C personality traits were associated with very, very good, very kind behavior, but good in an excessive way. This means they carried the demeanor of someone who was rigidly set on pleasing others, appeasing and completely unexpressive of any negative emotions. In other words, they do not express anger when needed. In other words, they don't say no when they should say no. They feel like deep down they have to be good to deserve being loved. That if they say no, that means some way part of them deep down feels like they're not lovable. Also feeling responsible for how other people feel and what they experience. Having a deep, rigid set of I must not disappoint anyone. I'm not worthy unless I'm doing something useful. If people knew how I really felt, they wouldn't like me. If I turned down my friend, my spouse, my colleague, my parent, whatever it might be, then I would deserve to feel guilty. Now, this range of personalities have automatic and compulsive concerns for the emotional needs of others while completely disregarding their own emotional needs. So this is what Lydia Timoshok in 1987 pointed out was characteristics of type C personality. So never once complaining, never showing anything resembling anger. They had the drive to act cooperative and compliant with anything resembling anger. And they're also very cooperative and compliant with um, anything outside authority figures. So they just go with the flow. They do not they don't make waves. And this is what I would call, so there's four different levels for a person to have complete transformation. And these are people that are in level one. In other words, they follow the rules. They don't think that they can bend reality. They have a victim mindset to some extent. They think things outside of them are controlling them. They're in a mechanical world. They many times are not even aware that there's something like the subconscious mind. Now, that's not always the case because I know of many people who know about the subconscious mind, can speak about it very intelligently, about it very intelligently, but remain at level one. Okay, and I'll since I brought up the levels, I'll briefly cover those. Level two is where a person starts to realize that maybe they are able to influence things. Maybe that they can pinpoint their intentions do sometimes cause them to be a little more lucky. And they also start to realize that there is an inner world and an outer world. They realize that their subconscious mind is not just the part that controls your heart rate, your digestion, your sweating when you're hot, your shivering when you're cold, those kind of things. They realize that the subconscious mind is in itself an entirely powerful inner mind that has in many ways been kind of silent. Like I was talking about earlier, whenever the person has uh, the key for finding the key for healing can only be done in the blind spot. These are the blind spots. The subconscious mind is the only source that knows. And people at level 2, they become awakened. They start to realize that there's something about them that needs closer examination. Whenever they have chronic pain or a chronic illness or maybe even malignancy, they start to realize at some level that, hey, maybe this is trying to tell me something rather than this is something happening to me. That's at level 2, and that's awakening. Level 3 is where they go through the process of beginning to go inward. They begin to start healing the trauma. They start to work in whatever methods they do, whatever things they do. Maybe sometimes um, having different realizations. Maybe they realize that they've always said no and they should, or they've said yes when they should say no, and they start to go through the process of molding different thoughts, protecting their boundaries, speaking their mind. You know, this is the level to where I always work with people at level 3. Now I show every consult, I show these people this echelon of transformation that has to take place for the person to heal, because you cannot heal staying at level 1. You cannot heal by thinking that you're a victim in any way, shape, or form. You have to realize that your subconscious mind is influencing your body in certain ways. So I go through these levels with all my clients. So level 2 is where they realize that there's an inner and an outer mind. Level 3 is where we start to work together to go in and clear out, recode the system, changing the internal subconscious mind at the deepest, most influential root, which was the ages of 0 to 5 years old. Anything above that, most often, is going to be surface level stuff, surface level work where things will regrow, where perceptions are not fully shifted, maybe momentarily. And this is, if anyone does emotional freedom technique or EMDR or things like that, you've probably experienced that motion, that experience to where you get some work done, feels like something's shifted, you feel happier with, you feel like a little lighter, maybe something feels better, but over time you feel like whatever it was that you worked on has come back. And that's because there's been surface level approach. Same thing happens with emotional code and body code. And I can speak of that because I have a tremendous amount of clinical experience with all of those techniques. So, level 3 is where we do the inner work, the correct inner work, deep inner work, where the entire holographic imprints of the wounds are completely neutralized. That's when I know the person they'll never be the same. And that's where level 4 comes in. Level 4 is when a person has shifted their internal reality so much that their external reality begins to change as well. They start to heal, they start to have better relationships, they start to manifest the things in their life that they want rather than manifesting illness. Manifesting works on every level. Some people might think, well, manifesting is not true. You're definitely a level 1 if you think that. You're at level 2 if you realize that you are manifesting your chronic illness. You see, you're manifesting, but doing it incorrectly. And that's where your chronic illness, that's where your poverty, that's where your waking up feeling angry at the world comes in. Okay, so just a brief summary of those levels. I obviously can go in a lot more depth in those, but I want to get back to this type C personality. So Dr. Timoshok was the director of behavioral medicine program at the University of Maryland Medical School. And she went through the process of inquiring with around 150 people who'd been diagnosed with melanoma. And her findings demonstrated that all of them had personalities of being absurdly and overly nice, pleasant to a fault, and always having their focus of attention in an outward aiming direction, avoiding anything about themselves. Now, that's level 1. They're at a level 1 understanding of themselves. Level 1 through level 4 is a blueprint of how your consciousness upgrades, because you cannot, as Einstein famously said, solve a problem at the same level of the mind that created the problem. And that's a majority of people out there. When you're looking for external things, when you're looking for, I've got this illness, let me take some pills. I've got this illness, let me get some chiropractic work or some laser work done. I've got this illness, let me get in a hyperbaric chamber. I've got this illness. Let me, whatever protocol you look on the external side without changing the level of conscious awareness, you stay at level one and the illness will always resurface. That's just a number. That's just the name of the game. The person who avoids anything about themselves while putting so much attention on the outside, even if they're focusing on being a nice person outside, um, is not aware of the two minds. So they are at level one. So let's observe another example from Anita Morana, okay, Morini. In her book, Dying to Be Me, she covers the details of her own account of having uh, metastatic lymphoma and assumed to be terminal when she was diagnosed at the age of 43, and what she feels responsible for creating it. She had a near death experience where she learned of her own inherent worth. So she had a near death experience. It's a very fascinating story. Um, and in her near death experience, she learned of her own inherent worth. She had communication with her father, and this shifted her perception so much that she instantly started to heal. And so she went from level one to level, three right away. And you have to get to level three before you could ever reach level four, and level four is where the magic begins. That's where you have all the synchronicities in life. And life itself is a very pleasant journey. And it's before she healed this part that we should pay attention to. Okay. Before she went through this healing herself, we should very much pay attention to these words that she used. The person I was before I got cancer was afraid to disappoint other people. I was a pleaser. And those are in quotes. Okay. This personality trait of being automated in a knee jerk like impulse to repress her own needs while being overly distressed for the needs of others is a concrete, um, a concrete likelihood, okay, concrete circumstance for the development of chronic disease and cancer. Okay. Anita's description of herself continues. I completely lost myself in satisfying other people. I became so drained, being always the person who was there for everyone as a rescuer. I was someone who could not say no. My personality was such that I needed something as drastic as cancer to give me a reason to take care of myself. Now, you see that? That's where level two comes in. Level two comes in that she realized this cancer was there as a message, not as some, cruel outer trick that just happened to her. It was there to teach her something, right? So it took her having a near death experience to realize and to see her own worth and believe in her own worth. A key factor that's common to all who heal from some kind of incurable illness. Okay. The key factor that is common in all those who heal from some form of incurable illness or incurable pain or idiopathic pathology, the people who experience spontaneous remission are the ones who change how they see themselves and what they believe about their own worth. And that is shifting from level one into level two and then level three. Level three is where they go inside. They start shifting how they feel about themselves. After that, level four just naturally happens. And it's the idea that our mind and our beliefs are somehow influential of the development of pathologies is not one found with open arms, though. Okay. This is not one that's greeted with many people. And it's not often only disliked, but sometimes even denounced or even declared as wrong. Okay. Dr. Marcia Angell, Dr. Marcia Angell, the first woman editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, criticized this concept once by saying the mental state as a factor in the causing of specific diseases is a false one that implies that there's a certain level of blame, putting blame towards the patient. And her statement says when patients are already burdened with a disease, they should not be burdened to accept responsibility for the outcome. Now, in that statement, okay, she's both right and wrong. I agree that no one should be blamed or made to feel guilty about the unfortunate circumstances. that they perhaps find themselves in, whether it's a chronic illness, poor results in some area of their life that they want to change in their happiness and their health and their emotional well-being, maybe in their material wealth. These are all things responsible by the subconscious mind. So blaming a person, particularly for the idea that it was something consciously and deliberately proceeded, is not only cruel, unsuitable, it's not something that is ideal, but it also does nothing to improve the situation. So blaming somebody does nothing to improve the situation. That being said, we must understand that the answer is not to plummet into an effortless misconception by ignoring the attributes of certain personality traits, which manifest in disease, emotional narratives, developmental accounts, and what events took place in the person's childhood. Is not to blame them, but it's to recognize and acknowledge for the purpose that there's something going on, a program running in their subconscious mind. Most people don't know the subconscious mind is the most powerful goal achieving agency, and it cannot reject anything placed into it between the moments of conception to around 4 to 5 years old. And this is where graduating from level 1 to level 2 is a necessity for that person in order for them to promote healing and in the long run gain self-acceptance, self-love, and forgiveness for themselves and forgiveness for others. One of the most crucial things about completely changing your self-image and how you feel yourself and to completely transform your life has to do with forgiveness and forgiveness of others, forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness of others. So my intentions in pointing these personality traits out is never to offend anyone, and it's not to blame the person as an individual. Okay. Having said that, I have found that compassionate provocation is the fastest and most streamlined way to transform yourself and to heal from whatever ailments challenge you that you are currently presenting with. If you find yourself being provoked by something that is said here in this podcast, that it's personality traits that cause illness more than most other things. Okay, it's not even controversial. It's definitely supported by the literature, and it my work confirms this every single day. When people come to me and they're doing so many things right, they're eating right, they're taking care of themselves the best they can, they're detoxifying, they're avoiding chemicals, they're eating organic foods, all these things, and yet they're still plagued with something. Something isn't right. They're not healing the way they should. They don't feel good about themselves. They're usually stricken with terror about something or fearful about the world in some ways. And I promise you that your body is trying to give you a message. And perhaps you're at level 1, maybe taking steps towards level 2. But until you recognize that there's two worlds going on, the conscious world that you're aware of, the conscious mind is where most people operate from. And level 1 is where most people, including many doctors, operate from. Okay. Level 1 is where a majority of people not only operate from, but unfortunately is where they stay. And this is why you can see many people become degreed professionals, and yet their life doesn't really improve. Their life doesn't improve despite getting some kind of education. Maybe even they get a better job. When they get a better job, does their life improve? Not really. And you could argue, well, they've improved because they have a house and they've got an income and stuff. Right. But that doesn't mean that they've improved. That just means that they have a few more options when it comes to being able to buy meals for their family, which is always good. That's always a good thing. But if they're still at level 1, their level of living, understanding themselves, and improving their life has not changed. Okay. So if you find yourself in any way getting triggered by any of these things that I'm saying, um, it's never to offend. Okay. I want to understand. Please understand my intention was never to offend anyone or blame anyone for these adaptions from injuries during childhood years. That's what they are. If you find yourself feeling that way, I highly urge you to do the exercises in the later chapters of my books. Okay, the later exercise of my book that is From Pain to Purpose, a complete guide on healing PTSD. Love yourself enough to get that book on how to clear these imprints, because the feelings that are getting triggered are the ways your system is trying to tell you that something needs attention. And these are of utmost priority for healing to occur. It's not me that upset you. You didn't learn to get upset or triggered by what I'm saying here. I guarantee you learned it at a previous time. And the feelings that come up in your body and maybe the emotional cascade is your body's way of showing you that something needs attention deep down. Now, it is human nature to respond to our wounds and project them out onto other people in front of us. Psychology calls this a fundamental attribution error. It's whenever we see someone doing something that we perceive that's wrong and we attribute it to a flaw in their character rather than the individual's current situation. And it's whenever and at the same time, when we do something wrong, we tend to excuse ourselves because it's the circumstance that caused it. You know, how many times have you honked at somebody at a green light who is sitting there because they assumed the light was red? You're honking at them, you're wanting them to move, right? And then you're like, come on, pay attention. You're driving a car here. But maybe a week later, a month later, you find yourself at a long red light. You glance at your phone, it turned green, and somebody honks behind you, and you go, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. You know, that's a classic fundamental attribution error where we see someone doing something that we perceive as wrong. We attribute to some kind of flaw in their character or their individual, you know, rather than the individual's current circumstance. But yet, if we do it, we tend to excuse ourselves. We tend to say it's the circumstance that caused it. And as you go through some of these exercises that are in the back of my book, I encourage you to love yourself, to only see the best in yourself, have the compassion and appreciation for yourself enough to find these holographic imprints, locate them, and begin to remove these, because I can promise you it wasn't me it wasn't me that offended you. It's not the words that you're hearing today. It was something else, a different time where you first learned this. Okay. So these are some of the characteristics I've noticed in my own functional medicine practice. And by not only just what I saw clinically, but studying the written works of others, huge amounts of journals and voluminous amounts of research, as well as what I could find documented in, peer-reviewed published journals. And I realized that although I was helping my patients with lifestyle changes, healthier habits, you know, changing their diet, removing, inflammatory foods, stuff like that, um, seed oils and things like that. Even though I was doing all of that and I was working with their subconscious mind, I was only working on the surface. Okay. I was only working on the surface level, nowhere where I needed to actually go to in order to achieve and promote deep level healing and permanent transformation. So let me switch gears for a moment and say that whenever a person is born into the world, if the events that they experience early on are heavy and arrive frequently, the fracturing of their psyche will arrive early in life. Okay. So there are many people out there with some pretty nasty perceptions, and yet they stay healthy. Then there are people who have so much niceness, they're so excessively nice that they become diseased. So, what's happening here? Simply stated, negative thinking in itself does not breed disease, but negative feelings unresolved, trapped inside, will kill and maim. And what we're going to talk about briefly here is the kind of personality that is formed from childhood experiences when their own individual needs are disregarded or not satisfied or met. This leads to developing of a superficial attitude that they don't need help from anybody in the world and they're fully capable of taking themselves. This is another type of personality. So we should take a moment to distinguish the difference between these in this kind of personality I'm discussing here is common with people that have MS and ALS. Okay. Uh, they they have this compensation pattern associated with uh, just not wanting to ask the outside world for help, feeling like they can do it on themselves, and having a very rigid identification with social roles, duties, and responsibilities. If you know anything about Lou Gehrig, he was one who, a baseball player named ALS was actually named Lou Gehrig's disease because of this kind of personality trait where he never missed a game and he would continue playing through illnesses, even with fractures, never missing a game, never saying no, always doing those things, feeling, no matter what, there was a refusal of uh, attempting to let himself heal and take care of himself. It was an obligation to duty. Okay. So there was a tremendous amount of suppressed feelings as he went through this obligated identification or role to specific duty, whether it was playing a baseball player or just overall interacting with the world with this personality. So, what's common is, like I just said here, negative thinking in itself does not breed disease, but negative feelings unresolved that's trapped inside will kill and maim. Let me take a moment to distinguish the difference between repression of emotions and suppression of emotions, both of which prevent the flowing of energy and develop into very dangerous circumstances. Suppression is the conscious choice of intentionally blocking an emotional expression during the process of being neurologically aroused. So we've all been familiar with this at one point or another. If we were uh, listening to a friend or a family or a family member or a loved one, and let's say that they have just experienced a loss of someone, something is wrong. They come to you and they're crying. They really need a shoulder to cry on. They had a recent ill experience they just went through, and as you're hugging this person, saying they're there and you have your arms around them, you're letting them cry on your shoulder, you notice something comical in the background suddenly get your attention. Something funny happens, like a dog walking and he trips and kind of rolls and hops up. Something that would normally make you laugh. Okay. As you're hugging your friend or your family member and you see something funny in the background that would almost make you laugh, you don't laugh at that moment. You actually suppress it. The timing is completely inappropriate. When you're in the midst of compassionately listening to another person in great sorrow, you are going to suppress your urge to laugh, right? We've kind of been through that before. Another example is, once in Africa, I heard a guide say to us that if you ever see a lion running at you, stand your ground, lift your arms up, because 90% of the charges that a lion does are mock charges. So if a lion takes a full out run at you, it's much likely to be a mock charge. And at that moment, you're going to literally suppress your fear. You're going to literally, like the old saying goes, don't let them sense your fear. Don't let them smell your fear. You're going to suppress that fear and raise your arms, knowing that there's a 90% chance it's a mock charge. This again is an example of suppression. You're literally blocking, shutting down, you're pushing down an emotional expression for the process during the process of being neurologically aroused. Contrast that with repression. And this is done entirely subconsciously. Okay. This means the person is not aware they're doing it. As soon as it happens, they push it down. As soon as something happens, they push it down without even really a conscious response to it. And this is the way that most people repress their feelings. They pretend to agree with something that goes against their instincts, or something they even find repellent, or something they would normally want to avoid. So the people that I mentioned earlier that don't say no when they should say no, they feel like no means I can't handle something. No, I have to be good to deserve being loved. If I say no, I'm not lovable. I'm responsible for how other people feel. and what they experience, I must not disappoint anyone. These are people that repress their feelings. In other words, uh, they pretend to agree with something that completely goes against their internal instincts, or something um, that they find repellent, that they would rather avoid, but they go along with it. Now that creates a huge internal shock within the body, and that shock over time is what breeds that illness. Just like in the beginning, I mentioned personality C type, and that's just another characteristic of how people have personalities that come from early childhood experiences that breed illness.